It was a quiet night, and I was home alone. My roommates were out of town and I had the house to myself. I was enjoying the peace and quiet until I heard a strange noise coming from downstairs. At first I convinced myself that it was just the wind or the house creaking, but the noise persisted and I couldn't help feeling that someone was in the house with me. I tried to ignore it and distract myself with a book, but I couldn't concentrate. The noises persisted. It sounded like someone was walking around downstairs. My heart started pounding in my chest and I knew I had to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way down the stairs. The noise grew louder and I could feel my palms getting sweaty. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw a shadow moving across the wall. My heart skipped a beat and I froze in terror. I didn't know what to do. I was alone and I had no idea who or what was in the house with me. I decided to call a friend for help. I dialed her number and waited anxiously for her to pick up. "Hello?" she answered. I explained what was going on as best as I could without going into a full-on panic attack. "Okay, stay calm, I'm coming over right now," she said. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I wasn't alone anymore. My friend was on her way and I knew I could count on her to help me. I waited nervously for her to arrive. The minutes felt like hours and every sound made me jump. I heard footsteps coming from the hallway and I started to panic, but then I saw a familiar face and my heart lifted. "Thank God you're here," I said, hugging my friend tightly, tears streaming down my face. "It's okay, we'll figure this out," she said, leading me to the living room. We sat down on the couch and my friend started asking me questions about what had happened. I told her everything I had heard and seen, and she listened attentively. She took me seriously and that made a huge difference. As we talked, we heard footsteps coming from upstairs. My friend's face grew serious and she got up from the couch. "I'm going to check it out," she said, grabbing the flashlight. I felt a surge of fear, but I knew I couldn't let her go alone. I followed her up the stairs, my heart racing again. We searched the house room by room, but we didn't find anyone. There were no signs of forced entry or anything out of place. We couldn't explain the noises or the shadow I'd seen. My friend stayed with me for the rest of the night, and I felt safer with her there. We talked and watched TV, and I eventually fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up in the morning, she was still there, sleeping in the armchair. But then I noticed a breeze in the room. I got up off the couch, walked out the living room and froze. The front door was open, as if someone had just let themselves out. I say out because we had definitely checked the locks the night before and there was no forced entry, which means there was most likely someone still in the house when my friend and I were sleeping. We checked every corner of the house, which seemed less nerve-wracking in the daylight, but there was nobody there. I called our roommates to let them know what had happened and to see if they could shed any light, but they had no idea and said to call the police. The police came round, but because there was no apparent break-in, they couldn't do much, apart from recommending that we change the locks. We never did figure out what had happened that night, or how anyone got into the house in the first place. But having my friend there with me made all the difference. I'll never forget her kindness and support during one of the scariest and weirdest nights of my life. I was home by myself one night last year. It was dark and stormy outside, and I had just finished dinner and was settling down for the night. My family had gone out of town for the weekend, and I was left alone in our big, old house. As I sat in the living room, listening to the sound of the rain tapping against the windows, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. I tried to shake it off, as best as I could, but the feeling wouldn't go away. As the night wore on, I began to hear strange noises. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just the wind rattling the windows, or the house making random sounds, but the noises continued. It sounded like footsteps or a weird tapping moving across the floor above me. I froze in panic, my heart pounding. Was someone in the house with me? I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it was just my imagination, but the noises kept coming. I knew I had to investigate, but I was too scared to move. Finally, I mustered up the courage to slowly make my way up the stairs. As I crept up the stairs, I could still hear it. The noises sounded like they were coming from one of the bedrooms at the end of the hall. I reached the top of the stairs and cautiously made my way down the hallway. The door to the bedroom was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light coming from inside. I pushed the door open, my hands trembling. Inside the room, I saw someone standing in the corner, facing away from me. It was too dark to make out any details, but I knew it wasn't just a shadow or my imagination. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence in any way. I took a step forward, but the floorboards creaked beneath my feet. The figure slowly turned around, and I could see its face for the first time peering from beneath a hooded top. It was grey and tired looking, with dark sunken eyes. I froze, paralysed with fear. It began to move towards me, its steps slow and cautious. I turned and ran, stumbling down the stairs in a blind panic. I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps growing louder, like it was deliberately stomping its feet. I burst through the front door and ran out into the pouring rain, not stopping until I had reached the safety of my neighbour's house. When the police arrived, they found nothing out of the ordinary in my house. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone else being there. They tried to tell me it was probably just my imagination, and I could tell that they weren't taking me seriously. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt. To this day, I still feel a sense of dread whenever I'm home alone. I try not to think about that night, try to convince myself that it was all just a nightmare, but sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the wind is howling, I can't help but wonder what was going on and who that was. It was a Friday evening, and my parents had just left for a weekend trip out of town, leaving me alone in our old house for the first time. I was excited and nervous all at once. Finally, I would have the freedom to do whatever I wanted without any parental supervision. But as the sun began to set, the excitement started to fade and the nervousness became more pronounced. I decided to watch a movie, but as I settled in on the couch, I couldn't help but feel like someone else was there. I brushed it off, assuming I was just imagining things, but I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. As the night wore on, the house began to feel increasingly eerie. Every creak and groan of the old building made me jump. I tried to calm myself down by reminding myself that I was safe and that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard a noise come from the back of the house behind me. At first, it sounded like it could have been the rain on the window, or maybe even an animal outside. But then I heard it again, and it was clearly coming from inside. My heart began to race as I realised that I was alone in the house with an intruder. I tried to think logically, telling myself that I should call the police. However, I didn't want to overreact and have them show up for a false alarm, so for some reason I decided to investigate the noise myself. I moved slowly, trying not to let anyone know I was there, if they didn't already know. The only sound I could hear was my own heart like a bass drum. I stopped at the corner of the room and looked down the hall. Everything looked okay, but then I heard something dropping on the floor from the small utility room and the whispering started again. I tiptoed towards the door, trying to muffle my breathing, which was getting faster with the adrenaline. As I got closer, the whispers became more distinct. It sounded like two people were having a conversation, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I stood outside the door trying to decide what to do. Should I knock and announce my presence? Should I call the police? Should I just turn and run? As I stood there, frozen in fear, the whispers suddenly stopped. I waited for what seemed like an eternity, but nothing happened. The whispers didn't start up again, and I didn't hear any movement inside the room. I decided to take a chance and stuck my head round to have a peek. Inside, the room was dark and quiet. The only light came from the moon shining through the window. I slowly made my way inside, turning the big light on. There were clothes scattered on the floor, but that was normal most of the time because that's where we do our laundry. But there was no sign of anyone else being there. Then I noticed the window was slightly open, and I couldn't remember whether I had left it open or not. I tried to convince myself that the noises I had been hearing were coming from outside, and I had just been confusing the sound of the wind, but I was doubting my own attempt at rationale. As I turned to leave the room, I heard a noise coming from down the hall where I'd been sitting. It sounded like someone was moving around in the kitchen. My heart sank as I realised it wasn't over, and that there was still someone in the house with me. I quickly made my way back to the corner of the living room and listened. I could hear the sound of the front door closing and footsteps running away from the house. As I stood there, adrenaline pumping, I heard a concerned voice calling, "Hello?" from outside. I recognized it straight away. It was my neighbour and his wife. Relieved, I ran down the stairs to them and explained what had happened. They said they saw two men running away from our house, so they wanted to come and make sure everything was okay. We guessed the two men had maybe been trying to burgle the house without realising somebody was home. Who knows? We called the police, and my lovely neighbours stayed with me for a couple of hours to make sure I was okay. I felt so lucky to have them there. Anytime my folks are out the house now, I make sure to double check that window's closed.